The Korean airliner, Reagan says tapes prove Russia's guilt. But was the command to shoot from Moscow? There are contradictory reports. In Lebanon, the Israeli pullback hots up the battle for no man's land. And Steve Ovett wins back the World 1500-meter title. Good evening. The row over the downing of the Korean airliner went a stage further tonight. America says it's now certain that the Russians knew they were dealing with a civilian plane. They say their tape recordings of the Soviet fighter pilot prove it. Russia's version at home is that the plane was like a spy plane and the correct procedures were followed. But other reports suggest the Soviets may be about to blame local officials for the disaster. President Reagan is going on television tomorrow night to say what action America is going to take.
President Reagan summoned leading congressmen to a breakfast meeting at the White House and played them the tape of the Soviet pilot's conversation with his ground command before he shot the Korean jet down. The tape was 8 minutes long, edited to 2 minutes to cut out the silences, and was in Russian. The congressmen were provided with a running translation. Afterwards, Senator Howard Baker described what he had heard.
It is clear beyond any doubt that the Soviet Union did in fact shoot down this unarmed commercial airliner, this Korean airliner. There is conversation there about the pilots arming and then disarming their heat-seeking missiles, about being locked on and then making sure they had the authority to fire, and they fired. And then in those tapes, it is clear that they are reporting the aircraft destroyed and the planes are discontinued.
At a briefing, the president's chief spokesman said it was clear from the tapes that the Korean plane was shot down by a Soviet Su-15 Flagon like this, which circled the 747 and was in visual contact with it for a full 2 hours before firing. It was also clear from the tapes that the Soviet pilot had not confused the 747 with its distinctive hump with a US Air Force RC-135 reconnaissance plane. The spokesman said that with a three-quarter moon and two such different aircraft, such a mistake would have been unthinkable. And he said from the strobe light on top of the jumbo and the lights on its wing tips, the Soviet pilot must have known he was firing at a civilian aircraft.
In strictly political terms, this whole incident could benefit President Reagan. That calm, controlled, but firm response that he has promised may not be enough to satisfy the right, but then he has their support already. And as for the left, he hopes that it will prove to them that he is not, as they have always claimed he is, trigger-happy. John Suchet, ITN, at the White House.
White House officials said the Russians heard on tape never referred to the plane as anything except the target. But James Wright, leader of the Democratic congressman who heard the tapes, said the Soviet pilot described the Korean plane as an RC-135, an American reconnaissance plane. Japanese monitoring agrees. In Moscow tonight, an unidentified Soviet source told the Associated Press news agency that Western reports of the plane's fate are correct. But he also insisted that the Russian military authorities had proof that the plane was spying. Another Soviet account excuses the decision to shoot down the plane on the grounds of lack of time. Victor Louis, the journalist known for high-level Soviet contacts, says local Russian officials took responsibility because they would have been blamed if they hadn't acted decisively. They must decide immediately without contacting Moscow. Soviet television news ran a major 20-minute item tonight, insisting that all the proper procedures had been carried out. The bulletin quoted the Soviet Air Defense Chief, Colonel General Romanov, who said the Soviet pilot reported that the plane was very like an American spy plane. It had technical equipment on board. The Russian fighter waggled its wings, but the crew acted strangely, ignoring all signals. Anti-Soviet demonstrators in America burst into a Russian diplomatic compound near New York tonight. They burned a Soviet flag and 5 police were hurt in the struggle to remove them from the compound. Japan's maritime agency in Waikanae says it's still searching the crash site as close as possible to the Soviet island of Sakhalin. 14 of the agency's ships are out around the clock, but they've found nothing. Today, a ferry from Waikanae carried 47 Japanese and Korean relatives of people lost on board the plane to within 30 miles of Sakhalin. They threw flowers and wreaths into the sea. Lebanon is tonight facing the threat of a new civil war as rival guerrilla groups battle for key positions in the mountains overlooking Beirut. Today's clashes erupted as the Israeli army moved south to new defenses along the Awali River.
At first light, as the Israelis pulled back, the fighting began in the Shuf Mountains outside Beirut, between the Christians and the Druze. Furious exchanges of rocket, mortar and artillery fire that have lasted most of the day. And behind the Druze came their allies, the Syrians, moving tanks into the town of Bamdoun outside Beirut before the Israeli Air Force counterattacked. It's clear that the government of Lebanon's President Jamal now faces a major battle for the mountains, with the threat of further Syrian intervention behind the Druze. Clear as well that the age-old civil war in this country is far from over, even though the Israelis have pulled back to a new line in southern Lebanon. David Smith, ITN, Beirut.
Israel says it rejects any blame for the latest fighting and has called its withdrawal a complete success. But the Lebanese say they were taken totally by surprise by the speed of the pullback.
The Israeli soldiers packed up their few belongings as soon as night fell, and well before midnight they'd started to pull back from their most advanced positions around the Beirut-Damascus highway. The withdrawal needed little preparation. The men here have been ready for it for 3 weeks. It had been postponed 3 times at the request of the Americans, who'd hoped to get some agreement between the warring Druze and Christians. In the twilight of dawn, a single, almost uninterrupted column of armor had reached the coast road. They'd passed the one route down from the Shuf Mountains and were now largely out of danger. Overnight, Israeli officers had tried to negotiate a ceasefire between the two fighting factions, but in vain. Shelling and mortar fire began immediately. One Israeli unit caught in the crossfire replied with several artillery rounds. And as the convoy rolled south to the new front line at the Awali River, Israeli planes were making a strike on a column of Syrian tanks to the northeast. They were advancing on Christian villages there.
Back at home, Labour leadership candidates have snubbed a call to stay away from this week's TUC Congress. It came from the TUC General Secretary, Mr Len Murray. But tonight, all but one of the candidates said they would still be going to Blackpool.
Union leaders are assembling here with membership plummeting and some would argue their influence at an all-time low. Len Murray said there were no grounds, however, to write up the movement's obituary. The unions, he made clear, would show they could adapt to the election setback and life under a Tory government. But will debates on these issues be submerged by candidates jockeying for the Labour Party leadership at fringe meetings during the week? Mr Murray said they should stay away.
It is an abuse of Congress to use it as a political forum, and I think it distracts the attention of the trade union movement of the nation from the really important matters to be dealt with here.
Then the TUC chairman, in his personal capacity, attacked moderate contender Roy Hattersley.
Above all else, what the Labour Party needs, whether he's on the right or the left, they need a strong leader who is going to knock the party into some shape to win the next election. And I do not think that Mr Hattersley has those qualities.
Police are tonight trying to identify the mystery weapon used to kill a young woman whose headless body was found in a West Country beauty spot. So far, it hasn't been found, and detectives are puzzled by her injuries.
The body was found in dense undergrowth at the end of a forest drive, closed to the public but still a popular spot for courting couples. It had been there for at least a week. The woman, dressed only in shorts and a t-shirt, was killed by at least 2 shots from some kind of firearm.
The body had shotgun wounds, but the police say these were not bullet wounds, nor were they caused by the pellets of a shotgun. They were caused by tiny fragments of metal, almost like shrapnel.
A ballistics expert is now trying to identify the kind of weapon used. The woman's head was severed from the shoulders in what police say was a deliberate attempt to prevent identification. A big search of the area, using a dog specially trained to sniff out human remains, has failed to find the missing head.
We're at a complete loss at this present time. We're just hoping that someone will recognise the description on the radio or television or in the newspapers and come forward and give us some idea who this young woman may be.
Police.
Now sport, and tonight there's a new world record holder in athletics, a new European golf champion and a new world motorcycling champion. With the details, here's our sports correspondent, Jeremy Thompson.
Steve Oved ran back into top form today, recapturing his 1,500 metres world record. He sliced almost half a second off the new mark set by Sidney Marie a week ago, and did it only hours after Steve Cram had failed in his attempt to do the same. Conditions at the international meeting near Rome were ideal, and for once the pacemakers did Oved proud. Last week he'd complained they were too slow, but this time he went into the final lap well on. He of Japan is the new Panasonic European Open golf champion. His final round of 69 at Sunningdale left him 2 strokes ahead of Nick Faldo, Carl Mason and Ballesteros. Aoki began the final day sharing the lead with Faldo at 5 under par. But Faldo's bid to become the first Briton in 20 years to win 5 major tournaments soon slipped away as he dropped 2 strokes through his indifferent putting.
Astronaut isn't always the serious business it seems. At the end of a highly successful flight, the crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger decided to thank NASA by putting on a show of their own. They called it their very own Chamber of Horrors.
Well, Houston, thanks very much for listening, and hope you've enjoyed the show. See you later.
Now the London Weekend Television area weather forecast. Tonight will be dry and there'll be clear skies at times. It'll be fairly windy with quite a brisk westerly breeze. Lowest temperatures will fall to about 13 degrees centigrade, 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Tomorrow will be a dry day with some sunshine every now and again. Temperatures will be much the same as today. That's around 20 degrees centigrade, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. But the wind will be lighter, a moderate westerly. In a moment, Ian Carmichael and Gene Simmons star in All for Love.
This is the tale of 2 travellers who arrive in New York for a connecting flight. One flew Pan Am, and one